Namaste and in la catch, and welcome to this episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and as always, I want to draw your attention to those two phrases. Namaste comes from the Sanskrit, an ancient language spoken. It's called Brahmi, and it means the divine in me recognizes the divine in you. In la catch comes from another ancient civilization, the Mayans, and it simply means I am another you. Now, if these ancient civilizations knew this, how can we bring that forth to the present and be that respectful towards each other? Try it, see what happens. Don't believe me? Test it out. You'll get some phenomenal results you never expected. All right, well, thanks. And I'd like to introduce this week's guest, Jeff Cohen, who is a fractional C-level executive, and he's got a tech-oriented environmental and sustainable business called C-Level Roundtable as one, and Steel Environmental as the second one that he is the chief operating officer of. And he's also an author who wrote the book called Countable. And it's a practical guide to lift, shift, and empower you and your team. Jeff, thanks so much for being here. We're going to have a phenomenal conversation, I feel.
I'm excited. Thank you for having me, Zen. It's really my privilege and my honor to be able to have this conversation with you and share it with all the people that will benefit from listening.
Absolutely, and my pleasure as well, Jeff. So initially, you've had some really tremendously elevated positions in the business world that many don't experience. And we'll talk about that later on. But in the beginning, I want to kind of trace back as to how you developed your awareness and how that inner side of life impacted your early development in your young life, your teenage years, and how you got the impetus to head the direction that you went.
Well, that's a great question, Zen. I think, when you look at my early life, when I do at least, and I think about the things that shaped me and had me where I am today, there's a few stories that kind of come to mind. I'll just, pick one of them and share.
Sure.
But I will say this as a preface to that is that, my dad, who passed away when he was 51, left an indelible mark on me and my sisters. And I remember him ensuring that we knew that we could do anything that we wanted, whether it was to be a garbage man or CEO or something in between, like whatever that was for him. Like he just wanted to make sure that we got to do what turned us on.
That's powerful.
And yeah, it was, he in his own right was extraordinarily bright and successful, and then took on being an entrepreneur himself after having been one of the top executives for Playtex way back when, and then became a stockbroker. And we moved to Los Angeles and from New York, and he was a stockbroker. And like, hey, look, back then it's like, well, you got to have your own book of business, you got to do it all, and like that was his thing. And so he went from managing a lot of people and having a big organization to really being, accountable himself to what it was that he really wanted to do. And watching him and learning from him and seeing him was a great experience for me as a child to look at, like, what do I want to do in my life?
Right, and it gave you the opportunity to see someone that had had great success in one area and decided to make a total shift and move into something else and have success there too. The ability to do that is rare, let alone 100%. To have a direct experience of watching your father do it as an example to you.
Yeah, 100%. And I hear a lot of people talk about like their success and how great things are and all that. And I just want to let you know that I have had some ginormous failures. And so in this conversation, I want people to know like there's no question to me that's off limits. Um, if you make me cry, you make me cry. It's only because I'm willing to share and it still hurts and it's okay. Like there's nothing wrong with that. And I think the power of being able to be emotionally connected to the things that I've done, and not just the things I've done like that didn't work, but also where I got to learn something and take that into the future. Like my whole goal in having C-level roundtable as a business is, that no business stands alone, that no one ever go through some of the things I've gone through. I've really pulled some big, I've done some really stupid things, and some
We
things
all know.
that might not have been so stupid that just didn't work. And
Yeah.
it's a lot the way it goes, but I think, I can face those today.
Well, isn't it funny that in those situations where we feel like we've done stupid, then we roll into this self-deprecating mode for a while, right? We just beat up on ourselves and then sometime later we look back and go, wait a minute, that was like perfect for my own development because I learned something very valuable, even though I thought it was a stupid mistake at the time.
Yeah.
And the mistakes are obvious, things didn't work out maybe the way you wanted to, but still you learned, it's like Edison learned 90 or hundreds of ways not to make a light bulb until something happened and boom, there it was. And he didn't stop.
It's true. Well, I'll tell you a couple things. So early in my life, I was 8 years old and I wrote all of the professional sports teams and I asked them to send me stickers. Now, I had no idea what was coming, but it was a stack. It was enormous.
No doubt.
And then I turned to my mom and I said, that wall, that's the one I want to put them all on. And she said, no, you're not.
Right.
So I had all these stickers. What do you do with all these stickers? She won't let me put it on the wall in my room. What are the odds she's going to let me put them on the car? So I put them on my notebook and I went to school and my friends started buying them from me. I made $50 and my dad said to me, Jeff, that's amazing. You're an entrepreneur. And I said, wow, that's awesome, Dad.
Yeah. What's that mean? Right.
Yeah. And I've been living that ever since, from such a young age to today, being in a position to really look at what does it mean to be an entrepreneur and what you can do with that has an impact for the world. And I look at that as an early experience in memory, and we all have those. Like the first chapter of my book is called Grand Theft Auto. It's it actually illustrates for you the very first trigger that I found in myself. Now, I've been looking for my triggers and the things that set me off for the last 10 years. Like I've really been focused on like communication. I took a program called the Team Management and Leadership Program, which lasted for 2 years. Did a lot of soul searching. And what I discovered is that I still don't know all of the things that trigger me. So while I'm writing Countdownable, and I'm really thinking about like, why am I me? What have I done to get here? And I noticed like these are early events in our lives that have caused it. And what that has done, Zen, for me is It's made me very aware of the fragility of children. My wife and I recently became foster to adopt parents here in LA County. They're
Oh,
about to
bless your
become.
heart. You know, I had
That's,
that advantage as a child. I was orphaned and adopted.
that's amazing. You know, there's at any time just in LA County about 20,000 children that are in that system. And we we have been in this role, moving toward this role for 3 years. And in December of last year, we um, we had our first placement, and then she was taken back to her family 2 days later. And then a week later, we received an 8-month-old, beautiful little girl that was just, in need, right?
Yeah.
Um, and she came from some difficult circumstances. And at 8 months, you don't know anything. You're barely connected to the world. But I will tell you this, the trauma you can experience as an infant is something that it takes something to shift. And in the last 6 months that my wife and I have been raising her, what we have clearly seen is that there are times when she gets triggered, and times when there's something that's been there that we were working on helping her be okay with her life with. So, I still know that personally, I have not uncovered all of my triggers. I have not found them all. I've gotten to age 5. I know there's some stuff before that. I'm gonna keep looking. I know it's locked in here someplace,
Right.
but I will tell you this that's amazing about my foster daughter. She's just turned 1, a little over 1. And when my sister showed her an image of my father, just a black and white picture of my dad, she lit up. Every single time she sees that picture, she lights up. It's like he's there, like elevating her somehow. And she has that experience. And we, I mean, it's amazing. I just,
Oh, no doubt. And to just witness that and to make the observation and the clarity of that effect. And it examples to me that there are some things going on in other realms that we don't understand yet, and yet it carries this energy that is sensible, and especially with young children because they haven't developed the filters not to sense it yet, which is generally what our society teaches
I
us.
know it's kind of mind blowing when you think about it.
It
And,
is.
most of the work that I do is with people that have blocked most of that out. And
True.
so,
And for a time, I have to say that the journey you took to find your triggers is something that very few ever really consider. I had similar journey, only mine I realized that, and thinking back, you can imagine, here's a newborn taken away from its mother, not being, able to go home, and being in a room full of other infants and sensing their parents coming and taking them, going home, and feeling this sense of abandonment, although it wasn't fully cognated at the time. And then throughout my life, I've found that I've got various levels of triggers regarding abandonment. And even today, I just got remarried in 2017, and in going through this intimate coalescence of energy with my wife, there were instances where I was still afraid of being abandoned, even though I knew that this love that we share with each other is impenetrable at the level of togetherness, right? That we are locked in, and that she feels that way towards me, and I feel that way towards her, yet there's still that trigger that comes up at times. It's like, oh, wow, okay, I thank you very much. Now,
Well, I will tell you this, so um, in looking at triggers, because I think that's something that people don't think about very much, but the impact of being triggered is substantial.
not just on self, on everybody around you too.
Absolutely, 100%. I will say this. So first off, the last 20 years has been a real self-discovery for me, particularly the last 10 since I met my wife and started doing some of these self-awareness programs, right?
Interesting how relationships will do that, huh?
Right. Well, I was going through a divorce and my kids were not talking with me. And
I can relate to that.
Really took something to get out of here, mosquito. It really took something to get back to where they would. And, I love my sons. They're amazing men today. They are people you can really count on in a lot of ways. And yet back, 10 years ago, going through my divorce, they were hurt.
Right.
And it just pains me.
Can't help that, right? When you grow up, and I've had the same experience. I have 4 kids. I've got 6 great grandkids now, and I'm still rather estranged. And yet there's this thing that they go through, right? And it may be short term, it may be long term, but they have to go through it because it's the nature of wanting your parents to be together and then seeing this destructive activity that rips them apart, however it occurs, right? And it may be gentle, it may just be an agreement that, okay, we just can't get along, we need to separate. Still, their emotional bodies are highly impacted by it.
Well, they were teenagers and didn't necessarily understand what was happening.
I don't know the kids ever really do.
Yeah, but when I look back at all of that experience, what I'll say is I had a software company. I grew from nothing to 50 employees very rapidly in like 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of took my life and just exploded it. It was amazing. Like you just got to imagine what it's like to grow a business at that pace.
Oh yeah.
We were working with 100 Fortune 500 and Global 2000 companies, and we were helping them implement agile software process so they could write software. And a lot of what I've written in the book stems actually from that agile methodology. Now it's agile business process, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure. But when 2007 hit and the market just absolutely tanked, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, the state of California, Lockheed Martin, every single one of our clients that we were doing business with at the time said, hey, we love you guys. What you do for us is amazing. We're going to stop now. All at once. And, I had mortgaged and remortgaged my house. I had done a lot of things that were not necessarily good decisions, because when you're growing a business at a rapid pace like that, it's a cash monster.
Oh yeah, and you got to keep up.
It needs money. And suddenly I went from, 50 people to 0 in 6 months, and I was depressed, and there were so many sleepless nights. And then I just would sit in front of Star Trek for 8 hours a day trying to escape. And what really happened was I pushed away my kids and my wife. Like the most important people in my life didn't want to be with me. It was all on me. I mean, I can own that today.
Yep.
I can see clearly how I caused it. And then I can also see clearly how, like people said, get some help, Jeff, talk to someone. And we didn't view mental health 10 or 15 years ago the way we view it today.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't embraced quite the same way, and I was embarrassed, I think, at the time to say I need some help, and so I didn't, um, and just, you know,
Right. You want to get through it yourself. And I can totally relate. I worked for Allied Signal, which you're familiar with, back in the 80s. And towards the tail end of our marriage, I was putting in anywhere from 65 to 85 hours a week. I was in production control, responsible for $7 million in shipments and 800 part numbers for commercial spares. And so, and I loved what I was doing. I was also heavily involved with the church, doing the elder duties and going to school, trying to finish my degree. So I wasn't home. And that created a separation that I didn't realize the impact that was going to happen later on. And so, you know, it was tough for me because I grew up with parents that no matter what, they stuck together through everything,
yeah,
right? And life isn't always easy, but yet when you make that commitment to be with someone, it's a commitment that you need to honor through thick and thin, right? Well, that didn't happen. So it just destroyed me afterwards. And so I spent the year after our divorce just trying to find myself again, kind of like you probably did. And I thought I could get through it in a couple of years. Not a chance. That's a several decade process of really analyzing yourself, what you did, how you did it, how you could improve, what you could do better towards, you know, building relationships and things like that, that we don't often really consider after that, because we want to point fingers and not realize that those 3 that are coming back, or 6 if you're, you know, if you're shooting for both hips, that those are self-examination points that you need to be aware of.
absolutely. So, you know, so the reality is that, like, till I could actually own that I did all of those things, I was ineffective as a leader. And I look back at my company, and I think about all of the things that I did, and I know I didn't treat people the way I'd have liked to have been treated. I know that there's a lot I would have done differently had I had the wherewithal. And I'm
Awareness,
sorry,
even.
and yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I'm really clear that, you know, the things I did and said impacted people not in a good way in some cases, and I'm sorry. I mean, that's all I can say is I'm sorry. And, you know, people wanted to work for me and my company because we had tremendous momentum, a great vision, and all of that. And when it came down to, when the heat was on, like, I just didn't manage well.
Hmm.
And I've learned over the years, like, what are the things that you can do to make people's lives workable in a high stress environment, right? When you've got a goal, a dream, an ambition. And I was an entrepreneur, and I said, I'm going to run this company for a long time, and then I'm going to sell it, right? And I ran it for a while, and then it went bankrupt.
Just the
So
opposite
those
way.
two visions, they didn't meet in the middle the way I wanted, and there was a tremendous impact. And, you know, out of that came this notion that I actually had an opportunity to shift the conversation. And so when I started that team management leadership program I was telling you about, I very quickly got about 50 CEOs, entrepreneurs, and business owners together in small groups. And we were looking at what the gaps were in our business and what didn't work. And we found one common thread. I was amazed. I'm like, wow, there's really just one thing? Like, no, there's got to be a million things.
Sometimes it's just that simple.
Well, here's the thing. It's really basic. Like, when you get to the very basic, you funnel down from the world of what's wrong to the one thing that triggers it, right? Zen, you're not going to believe it. It's unbelievable how simple this concept is. I found that everybody has a different definition of what effective communication is.
Not surprising whatsoever, because in both my degrees, that was the core issue, was communication.
Right.
And I have a dear friend, mentor, 20 years my senior, was president of ADR, or the American Association for Alternative Dispute Resolution, for several years.
Right.
And he says to me one time, he goes, there really is no conflict. What happens is that two people that think they're in disagreement are simply miscommunicating. They've got two different dictionaries. They're speaking and listening from their own, and they have no clue what the other one is.
100%. So I'm going to share a story with you. It's not in the book.
This ought to be juicy then.
Well, it is. It's actually really, really juicy. And it's a personal story that, if you're unable to relate it to anything that happens in your life personally or business wise, I would invite you to like rewind and listen to it again.
Okay.
It's just, in my opinion, the most amazing illustration of effective communication in action. So my wife and I took our 1-year-old to visit some friends in San Diego a month ago. And my wife and her friend went to an event together. So my friend and I took our 2 girls to dinner. And we decided we were going to walk. He has a wagon. The 7-year-old is sitting in the wagon, loving that she's got the 1-year-old right there. And after dinner, we hopped back in the wagon to go to frozen yogurt. And on the way to frozen yogurt, I turned my head back and I see my 1-year-old standing up in the wagon, holding on for dear life, with this look of fear and terror on her face. And I said to my friend, please stop. And he did. I went over and picked her up and comforted her. What the 7-year-old didn't know is, like, she doesn't know how to sit down safely yet. Not walking. So it's really scary for her to sit. But the 7-year-old is sitting there on her video game, and I turned to her and I said, hey, honey, I have a question. Did you notice her sitting there or standing up and scared? And she said, yeah, I told you. I said, wow. And so then I said to her, I said, hey, I have a favor to ask. She goes, sure. What? So if that happens again, could you make sure that I answer you and that I heard what you said? She said, got it. And then she went right back to her video game.
Yeah.
Now, that's the way most communications in the world go. Right?
Unfortunately, yeah, you're spot on. And especially with technology and phones today, the similar thing. I went to a coffee shop and I'm watching this table of teenagers, and not one of them are talking to each other, and they're all on the phones.
But hold on for 1 sec, because that's not the end of the story.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Right. So here's the thing that you want to take away from this, because this is the one thing you can do in your communication with anybody to lock it in. So I said to her, hey, honey, as she went back to her video game, right? I'm just curious. What did you get? Now, it took her 15 seconds, which is a long time to process, to pick her head back up to say, oh, then I should make sure that you heard me.
Partial,
now
right?
Right. But now the communication, like, it exists. Like she's going to make sure I heard her. And the point to that story, Zen, is really simple. It's we communicate, we hear got it, and we move on to the next thing. The reason I wrote countable is because people have a negative impression of the word accountable. It gets a really bad rap.
Mm-hmm.
It took me 2 years in this team management leadership program to get comfortable with the word accountable, like it's not a bad thing. But most people hear the word accountable every night on the 6 o'clock news when someone's going to jail or when there's a politician they don't like and they want to hold them accountable. Being held accountable sucks. And that's the experience most people have with that word. So being in a position where you can go from that to where you can be counted on for something, it's enormous.
It actually is. And it's a necessary, and you're absolutely right. We get that kind of programming from major media, basically. And so this is a lot of how we're programmed unconsciously for the most part, and yet it still happens. And that the accountability really is just about being a good human.
Well, the thing is that most people have a negative impression of the word accountable. They don't want to be accountable. That's the very last thing they want to be, right? And then your boss says to you, you're accountable for something, and you're like, oh, okay.
Right.
Right. I mean, you really
what do you do with
want
that?
it.
I mean, do you make others accountable for yourself? I mean, that seems kind of oxymoronic, and yet we do.
Well, that's just it. There's two parts of accountability, but oftentimes we only exercise the one part. The one part we exercise is we say, Zen, you're accountable for washing the dishes. Now, I don't know about you, but it's not a strength I have, not something I like doing. Frankly, I'm not particularly good at it, right? But now I'm accountable for it. So the sink fills up with dishes till I finally, you hear my wife say 4 times, can you wash them already? And then I do. But the reality is that's not what happens in business. What happens in business is the CEO says to someone, I need you to do this. And then they forget about it. And 3 weeks later, on Friday, right before the long weekend, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they get a phone call. It's their boss. Hey, where is this? When am I going to get it? Right? Now, it's not necessarily something that caters to their strengths. It's not something that they're particularly good at and don't like doing. And it was added on after they got the job or during the final job interview. And they said yes, because that's where their paycheck comes from or where they want it to come from.
Right.
And the manager has now taken their A employee and made them a B employee. And they do that all the time because now they're disappointing you. What's missing is that in accountability, there's trust. I'm going to trust you're going to do something. And you'll remember this. And then there's verify.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, in the 80s, when Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev signed the SALT agreement and, reduced nuclear arms in Russia, there was trust. Ronald Reagan said, we're going to trust you, Mikhail. And then we're going to verify. We're going to send teams of people to inspect. And what's missing for most organizations is an effective verify system. So, we talk about the book a little bit. What I created was a system that has people understanding what's expected of them and being checked in with on a regular basis. And, there's some people that could occur like it's micromanagement. To me, it's just management. Like, if you've ever managed people, then people managers, what they often do is they aim to manage people, but managing people is a lot like herding cats. Very hard to do. Shift that.
For the most part, if you have that notion that it is, right? Because you don't necessarily know how. and you're free
Well,
to ask questions.
that's true. But I would invite you to consider that managing people is not something you really want to do. They don't want to be managed. They want freedom to do what they're good at, what they love
Absolutely.
doing, and what what they want to do, what they have strengths in. So instead of managing people, manage promises. That's a lot more powerful. If
Mm,
someone says to you, I can do this and I can do this and I can do this, you can count on me for that. But I can't do this. Don't ask me to wash the dishes. Great. Let me
right.
find someone that loves washing the dishes, right? I had this amazing woman. She's like family to us, and she comes and she cares for our household because it's so rare that you'll ever see me mop the floor. But she does it every week and
Right.
she loves doing it. I can count on her for that, right? The reality is that if you have an employee that has strengths in an area that you're leveraging and loves doing that job and is good at it, what do you think they would call that job? Probably
Oh,
their dream job,
yeah.
right? Now, if they have their dream job, what's the likelihood they're going to leave you? It's pretty small,
Yep.
really small. And the fact of the matter is that turnover happens and then HR goes nuts trying to find people to fill the job and it costs lots of money. You've lost all of that cultural history that you have with that person and all of the stuff they know about their job that they're good at that doesn't get passed along. And now you have to retrain someone and get them up to speed and the future looks bright until during that last interview you say, oh, by the way, can you also wash the dishes? And from that moment, you just made the A employee you were about to hire a B employee because they're going to start disappointing you from day one. Stop that craziness. It's
Yeah.
madness.
Yeah. And you've set them up to do so. I kind of like your C-level roundtable. I've been part of a peer board for a number of years, and it was gentleman's been doing it for 30, 35 years, also 20 years my senior. And he was a gentleman I told you that we co-hosted the Two Small Biz Guys radio.
Sure.
And just an amazing gentleman. And one of the discussions that we have is just like this, how, when you're onboarding, how do you create the responsibilities, the expectations from both sides, the open communication. I'm working with another gentleman that does conscious contracts so that it's win-win. It's not a one-way street, which is what you're talking about. It's like the offer and the acceptance, right? And that's not necessarily an agreement. That's just a willingness to step in and do what's expected.
I actually disagree with that. I
Okay,
think it's
cool.
I think it's absolutely an agreement. I think
Well, I would
that
agree with that, but I'm talking about a true win-win, because when you set it up, the other person is disrespecting their own boundaries through their agreement.
I agree because they want to please and they want the job for some reason,
Right.
or there's something that's coming from a different angle and impacting that. 100%.
Okay.
No question.
Yeah, and I agree with you. There is an agreement there, but it's not to the depth of where it could be, which is what we're talking about, right?
Well, and
The A employee is one that says, okay, yeah, I'm willing to do this, but sorry, I'm not going to wash your dishes.
but the thing is that things change over time because I remember, in my life, I started out in sales, right? And then I wanted to get into technology sales. I went to work at IBM and some other tech companies, and I loved doing that. And then I started my own company, right? And I loved doing that. And then I started another company, and times got tough, and I had to go back to work. And I went back to IBM, and then a couple of other smaller software companies after that. What I realized when I was with those companies is that was not the job I wanted. But we hired people based on their experience, not their desire. We believe them when they say this is what they want to do.
Right. And
Why
now
don't you
today,
do it?
one of the things that's prevalent in the hiring process, more so than pretty much anything else, is attitude,
Yeah. So
innovation,
what's
your creativity, being able to be flexible in tough situations in order to figure out what needs to be done in the best way possible.
right? But if you knew what someone's strengths were and how they fit into your team in the beginning before you even hired them, or did
Right.
that analysis on a regular basis, like every week, you can tell, ah, Jeff doesn't like doing this task. We keep pushing it out. Every time I meet with him, this priority of mine is not a priority of his. Okay, either I can get pissed off at Jeff, or I can look and see if there's someone else on the team that has a strength in this area, does it great, loves doing it. Because you know what? Let me use Jeff for what he's great at. And let me
Right.
go ahead and use Zen for what he's great at.
Yeah.
And that's how you have effective teams and teamwork.
Right.
But
That
that's
came
not the
out in the
way.
strengths movement, right?
Yeah, StrengthsFinder, right? I'm a
Right.
big StrengthsFinder fan, and when whenever I do hiring, that's part of it, right? Because I want to know. There's
Sure.
a couple of other things that are also part of it as well.
I think the DISC assessment proves really almost imperative in understanding, first of all, the communication and problem solving preferences of your potential new hire, right? When you
Well,
know
there's
how they operate, then you can learn how. It's like the fifth, strategy in Covey's stuff: seek first to understand, then to be understood. You have to understand, and it goes back to the two dictionaries. You have to understand the other dictionary before you can begin to communicate with them in their language. You're still trying to talk your
100%.
language and they don't understand your language.
100%. Well, and I'll tell you, this is the way we used to use the disc in my software business in the early 2000s. We would use that to determine after the initial interview who the best manager for that person would be based on their disc and the disc of the managers.
Sure. You're
That's how we
looking
would
for
align.
fit. You're looking for a dovetail fit rather than put a round peg in the square hole.
Yeah, because we had 4 managers that any of our professional services staff could go work for, right? And then what we would do after we had that is we would align that to the strengths of the team and look to see that they were complementary. We weren't looking to see that they were exact because we didn't want that,
Right.
right? But in consulting, there were things we were looking for, like, are they a learner, right? Things like that. So from a management standpoint, I think that's super, super important as part of your hiring process. And by the way, I detail what the process is in the book. In fact, just so you know, I've applied for the patent for the process. It's pending right now. But here's the thing about life today. There's nothing new. The only thing that you're going to read in the book that's different is that I went ahead and I took the process to the hairdresser. We dyed some of the hairs blue. Some of them are now purple. Then we combed them over and trimmed them again. And now it's the countable method and process. But it's something that stemmed from the early agile software development days that I was involved in. And now it's really an agile method for managing a business. And what it does is it takes a business from whatever method they're using. And there's some great methods like the entrepreneur operating system and scaling up and others that I just love.
Right.
What those methods all have in common is they all say things like, you need the right person doing the right thing at the right time. And I agree. I don't think there's anybody that would disagree. Here's what's missing. How do you know you have the right person? How do you know it's the right thing?
Right.
How do you know it's the right time? So I figured that out. I put that in the countable process so that you can figure it out, so that you can align your executives that report to you. And those executives can align their team members. And if you have another layer of people or 2 layers of people, you can stay aligned.
Hmm.
because you're always going to have things that need to be done that are off book. So when you do, who can you
Very true.
count on for those, right? And then, count onable being a play on the word accountable, but really not. Because if you think about it, when you ask me what I can be counted on, I can tell you with pride that you can count on me to have integrity about being on time to meetings. Wow, who has that?
Hmm.
That you can count on me to follow through and make sure that I got what you wanted me to get before I go off and do it. Right? And guess what? Sometimes there's a breakdown. It doesn't always work. But what I'm aiming for is that every leader on your team has the skill to use this process to create more leaders. Because as a business owner, as an executive, or as an entrepreneur, if you ever want to have a family vacation and not be working 2 to 4 hours a day, you have to empower your people to take stuff on.
Yeah.
And it'll be okay. And then what'll happen, two amazing things happen. And with these two things, like, your life will be different forever. You'll actually be able to have a personal life. And someday, should you decide you want to sell your business, you'll be able to, and you won't have a 5-year earnout. Because, by the way, most earnouts are never fully paid. Because when you have to be there and you're the most important person in your business, and it cannot grow without you, who wants to buy that if you're
Right.
not there?
Right.
And if at the stage you're at when you go to sell it is that you're still the most important person, what are the odds that you're going to have the skill to develop someone else to take your job over?
Right. Right. So what I hear you saying with all this is that there's kind of a twofold process. You've got to have the tools in place to do the initial assessments, right, of the individual, their skill set, their attitude, their problem solving communication preferences. And then you have to implement, when you're implementing that, you have to observe the results of how it's working and then kind of massage the process along the way. It's kind of like, it reminds me, coming out of education, I taught high school for a number of years, and one of the things in our teacher training program, we talked about multiple intelligences and how Gardner's work, and that being able, learners have the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic methodology to begin with. And that's about as far as education has gone, as far as assessing how a student learns. Then Gardner came along and said, hey, wait a minute, there's some other things that we've observed, and I'm calling those multiple intelligences, and there were 8 of them at the time, I think, including musical rhythmic, visual spatial, intrapersonal, interpersonal, logical mathematical, just to name a few. But these are things that at that time could only be observable in the way the students were in their process of learning, right? Which really takes a lot more observational capacity from the teacher. And yet what I found in education was that, in one instance, I had 50 students in a classroom and I had 50 minutes of process, right? And how are you going to give those individuals individual attention? You've got 1 minute per student. That's just kind of doesn't make sense. And yet this is what our educational system is. So being able to observe that, especially on when you get into the professional and business side of things, and to be able to tweak it, and because you're in that place of being willing to be vulnerable enough to not think you know everything, right? And look at, okay, what's working and how can we improve upon that?
Well, first off, just to unpack what you said, because there's a whole lot there. There's 2 issues that we're really talking about. One is alignment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So someone has a vision, they've effectively communicated it, right? And now it can be absorbed and acted on. That's part of the alignment framework I have in the book.
And creates the culture.
Well, you've got to have a shared culture. Like there are things about the culture you've got to have, right?
Right.
And then there's the trust framework, right? And you put those two together, you get the trust alignment framework. Now, here's the trick. It's not just about alignment. It's not just about trust. You want to know what it's really about. It's about what the outcome is that you want. The number one thing that matters is the outcome. If you communicate effectively based on the outcome you want, it's a lot more likely to show up. However, I have a client. Love this guy. Started working with him about a year ago. Very self-righteous guy, very smart. He's a doctor. He just knows he's right. Now, there's two ends of the spectrum. There's I'm right, and then there's what you want. You have a choice. You can absolutely be right all day long, or you can give up being right and say that doesn't matter. What matters is the outcome, what I want, right?
Or what needs to happen. It starts with what I want, but it's the process of getting that, right? That you move from one position to the other.
Well, the needs to happen, and I get hung up a little bit on words like need, because that is like a constraint.
Agreed. Agreed.
So what I think about is what you want to have happen and how you prioritize it.
Not necessarily the how, just that it does. And that's where you delegate that trust and alignment to what you've put in place, that it actually takes place.
Right. But if you're not thinking about the outcome that you want, right, what the needs of that want are not as relevant initially, at least in your communication with somebody.
Right.
Right. Because this client used to like kill people off. Like important clients that he had, he would just kill them off and then they would stop working with him.
And of course, he couldn't figure out why. He was blaming them because he was
the good news, right? The good news is that, you know, it's a process to be open to hearing about outcomes. But over time, what happened was one day he called me up. He says, Jeff, you're going to love this. I said, what am I going to love? He goes, well, I was thinking about an outcome I wanted. And instead of yelling at this other doctor, I held back and let the outcome lead the conversation.
Perfect. Right. Well, as an entrepreneur, right, we are taught to start with the vision and then back it up. Right. And it's that backing up process where you lose the self-righteousness and you acquiesce to and I'll use this term loosely, the needs of the process.
Right. Well, the reality is that you've got to actually be open and want coaching to be able to make a transformation like that in your life. And a lot of people are, and then they really resist it when you start engaging. And what I found is by having a well-defined process, which, by the way, the entire process is in the book from step 1 to step Z, like everything. And you can implement it yourself. And if you want, you can reach out to me on countonable.com so that me or someone from my team can help you answer questions or participate in our community or whatever you want to do. But like, I'm really committed that it be open source. Like, there's nothing other than people knowing that if they want to be certified in this process or if they want to implement the process, there's a support system.
And thank you for that invitation too, because that will serve at least some others, right? And you know, we've got, as long as we're looking for those things, and willing the coachability is an important factor. I had a client, in process with a client that came to me with a challenging manager, and the question was, as he was describing them, kind of the self-righteous type, right? I said, well, is he coachable? Is he willing? Because unless you're stepping into that place, it's just not going to work, because you're going to resist it all. Now, that doesn't mean you can't penetrate that shield, right? But it's a and it's a lot more arduous process, and still, you know, it limits the time it takes for the outcome to occur. And when you're looking at being agile and responsive and flowing with the trends and being able to actualize and take advantage of those, that process really needs to be truncated as much as possible.
So I would agree. And I think, you know, it's difficult when you have a manager, a boss, or somebody in your life that is not open and able to be listening from the outcome, but rather they're listening from what they want. It's not always an easy thing for people to make that shift.
So let's unpack that a little bit, okay? Because this is a critical point that you just made. How do you do that?
You don't. You create an opportunity. They will either buy it or not. But there's nothing that you can do to change anybody. People are the way they are. They get to choose if something is working or not working in their life, right? It's just a choice.
Well, how do you present that? What are the points of order, if you will, in the presentation of that invitation to align with the vision?
Well, so when somebody is not open to coaching and they're your boss, which, by the way, most employees are not likely to say to their boss, hey, are you open to coaching? Like, they're not going to do that. They're going to take whatever comes at them and then spend the next 3 days sorting it out in their head. It's going to impact their productivity. They're not going to, you know, get the stuff done that needs to be done as well. Maybe they're not going to communicate as well with other people. It's just going to impact them. So when a boss is not open to hearing what's occurring there, they're going to move on. Or the boss is going to...
Most people leave companies not because of the company, but because of their managers.
Right. And, you know, unless the leader of the organization is willing to tell on themselves, right? So like you heard me early on say some things about my life that I'm not proud of and get emotional about it. So as a leader, if you can't be authentic like that, you're going to run through people. Like, you'll have the occasional person that'll stick around forever because they've just figured out how to eat the crap and live with it. But the reality is that you're going to have turnover. Now, if the outcome is that you want stability in your organization and you want to have a profitable organization that saves a lot of time and money in hiring people, maybe you want to be open to some coaching. Maybe you want to look at a system that you can use that would have you be in a position where you can empower other people and you don't have to be the most important person. Like, start looking at those things. The only thing I can say to an individual that's oppressed by their manager is, I'm sorry. It's not always easy to get through to those people.
Absolutely.
And I would invite you to invite them to, like, listen to this podcast. You know, the Live and Let Live Foundation, Zen, that you're co-director of. Like, there's a lot that you guys are doing to help bring people up. The stuff that I do with Countable, point them there. And it might be something you could say, hey, I just read something really interesting. It could have a positive impact in our environment. Are you open? Now, if you phrase it like that, now it's not you're not forcing an outcome, you're proposing an idea.
Right.
And I would invite you that proposals of ideas to management sometimes land. And if it does, I would be ecstatic to meet you.
And then you can celebrate. Right. Now let's take that same, okay, let's take that same scenario. Let's drill down a little bit to the guy that's approaching the manager or leader that isn't coachable or thinks they aren't, right? And yet, whether they're aware that, so by your statements, that person is aware that coaching is available and may have had some on their own to get where they're at that point, right? So from that place, then, is there a different way, or are there different ways to approach that manager in conversation? Like we were talking earlier, right? The communication is what's imperative. And my dad used to tell me, a good politician is someone that can tell somebody to go to hell and get them to look forward to the trip, right? So from that perspective, can you, or are those opportunities to use a different language or approach with that manager that acknowledges them to begin with? Because the process I see is you've got to acknowledge the other person and their value first. Let them know that you appreciate and can see their value. And then with that, it kind of softens them and opens them up slightly to where you might be able to say, I'm having this challenge out here with this, and I'm thinking that we might do this, or that maybe you could help by doing this. How does that sound?
So I think that's
a different thing.
Those are absolutely some tools, Ben. But I want to go back to the trust alignment framework for a minute, because
okay,
if you have a manager that is operating the way that you described, and they're just not coachable and they're not working with you, there's something that's missing, probably in the shared values area, right? And the ability of resources is an important factor in the trust
absolutely.
Framework.
Yeah.
Right. So here's the thing that happens is that you wind up having a manager that doesn't think you have the ability anymore. So they start treating you differently, right? Whether or not you have shared values, what's happened is you're either no longer interested in the job, or they're no longer interested in you for that job, right? And that's when they get combative, and that's generally when people want to leave. That's why they leave managers. Managers know how to get rid of people.
Yeah.
Right.
I've got a perfect story that I'd love to share. It won't take too long. I mentioned Allied Signal earlier and my responsibilities there. So 6 months into my job, I had 2 supervisors show up at my cubicle. And of course, the first thing you want to do is, oh shit, what did I do? Right? Because they never approach you. Well, they saw the look on my face and they said, no, we're not here for that. We want to know what you're doing, because you're at the top of the production success. I forget exactly what the list was or what they called it. But so
top of the pile, man.
Yeah, I was top of the pile. 35 people in the department. And so I said, all I can say is it's interpersonal skills classes. It's how I treat people, because one of the things that brought my success was, hey, how can I help you do your job while you're doing something for me? And that was just phenomenal. So we had a production meeting shortly thereafter. The whole department, the general supervisor raised a question, hey, what can we do to help you? And there was nothing, no response. So I kind of took a chance and I said, I think interpersonal skills classes would be great, or interpersonal skills training would be good for the department, because we've all gone through the expediter realms and know how to get around the system. Now we're moving into a place where we're dealing with degreed people who expect a different level of behavior in order to get success. And it seems like, we're kind of spending our time beating people up to get what we want, and that's really not working. And man, I was shunned. Nobody talked to me for a week, 10 days after that, even my cubicle mate. And so it's like, oh, okay, I hit a wall, you know. And
Yeah.
then the following year, the notice for the meeting got taken off my desk, so I missed it. Came back to my general supervisor, apologized, said, hey, you know, and he says, oh, you know what you're doing. And he said, and we opened it up for suggestions. I said, you know, I still think interpersonal skills classes would behoove the department, because it doesn't matter what the product is, it's the people that get the job done. He says, you know, you're right. Do you know of anybody? I damn near fell out of the, you know, leaning up against the door jamb, almost fell off of it. And I think I might have for a moment. He kind of chuckled. And I said, yes, I do. I was finishing my degree at University of Phoenix. And so I knew I had access. Didn't really know anybody, but I knew I could find somebody. So I went out, found somebody. 3 weeks later, brought him in, and we had a discussion. I was included on it with my general supervisor and the consultant, myself. And he had contracts with Sperry, Intel, Motorola, British Navy for team building. And he gave his spiel. The supervisor said, love what you got. Let me talk to my department director and we'll get back with you. 3 weeks later, same week my divorce was final, I was demoted. And I eventually left the company about 4 or 5 months later. And because I was just distraught from my divorce and I just needed support from everything. So a year and a half later, I run into the purchasing department secretary, whose desk had been just outside my cubicle and I'd gotten to know fairly well. And she says, you know, you're not going to believe it. They instituted interpersonal skills development plant-wide. And I was like, wow, yes, you know, a year and a half later, or almost 2 years, you know, since that meeting, and yet it happened. Well, for me, you know, some people would probably get all angry and upset that it didn't happen in the time that they wanted it to. And yet I was a company guy. It's like, okay, cool. People will be affected. Their lives will change. Doesn't matter if I'm there or not. I'm okay where I'm at now. Right. But the fact is, that's probably something that many people go through in that process of trying to introduce change that would be better. Right?
Yeah, you just illustrated, like, what does it take it takes getting some momentum and building up, and it doesn't always happen overnight. And it's unfortunate because some people leave during the process, and that's just the way it goes. The fact of the matter is, I would have loved to
seen it through, but my life didn't allow it at that time. I needed to make better choices for myself, and that environment wasn't one of them.
No, I totally get it. Well, I really acknowledge the effort that you made to have that happen. And I love the spirit you're coming from inside of it. It really, I can see, makes a difference for anybody that you touch. So, Zen, thank you.
Well, thank you. It's a fortitude that and I have to say, my father actually probably gave me those values, morals, and ethics to be in that place. He was a 32nd degree Mason as well.
Oh, wow. Hey, listen, I'm loving this conversation, and I've got a client in 30 minutes.
All right, well, we're close. Let me ask you this. What advice on the short-term, simple, practical, pragmatic level, what advice can you give to others who see a need for change, both within themselves and organizationally, and how they might begin to facilitate that?
I think it's going to be different for everybody. But Zen, your story was a perfect method to share, right? Be courageous. Take a chance. Say something. Don't be quiet. Like, listen, you spend a lot of time at that job. Some people spend more time at work than they do with their family. Mm-hmm. So make it something that you love. You know, and management today is a lot more open to hearing about the things that you would like to have, and a lot more interested in keeping you rather than replacing you, because that's very expensive, not just money-wise, but to the impact on the organization. So even if you are a B player in their eyes, you know that you got hired and you were an A player in their eyes at one time, right? Mm-hmm. Figure out what you're really, really good at. Take the StrengthsFinder test or find another evaluation. Look at all, like I can tell you my top 5: futuristic, strategic, belief, winning others over, and communication. Let me tell you my very bottom, number 34, adaptability. I am not a very adaptable person.
Hmm.
Like once I have it, this is the way we're going. It really takes something for me to build the train tracks that attach to the tracks that I'm on so that I can
Yeah.
make that shift.
Yeah. So you're a high D.
Right. So
Yeah.
when you are able to identify those things and have confidence, then you can count on me. I come into your company, I'm going to help you brainstorm and come up with what the future looks like and a strategy on how to achieve it. Now, once we have all of that set in place, until we know that it's not working, I'm going to help you stick with it. I know those things. And by the way, you cannot count on me to do the dishes, but you can count on me for those things. I'm count onable. What are you count onable for? If you don't know, let's figure that out. And I'm more than happy to include you in our community, have conversations with people. Come to countonable.com. All of the resources from my book are going to be downloadable. And today, if they're not there just yet, today, what is downloadable is the first chapter and everything that leads up to it. And I really invite you to check that out. And you can just download it off the website because it's called Grand Theft Auto. And it's about a time that I stole a car. And you're definitely going to want to read that chapter.
Yeah, I used to steal my mother's cars, 15, and I'd sneak out because Dad worked at night. He was a tool and die maker for General Motors, and I would steal her car in the middle of the night.
So my story is nothing like that.
I'm sure.
And you're going to love it. So I just really invite you to come to the website and check it out. Let us know if you're interested in a further conversation. I do a lot of public speaking. A lot of organizations are looking for like, how can we get accountability in our organization? They want someone to come and speak or train about that. So we can do all of that. Like you guys brought in someone to implement a program. We do that for companies.
Cool, cool. And thank you very much. And admittance, part of my morning meditation is doing the dishes.
I love it. I will be honest with you, cooking and then cleaning up. I'll do the cooking and the prepping. That's my filling my soul.
Right.
Hate cleaning the mess up.
Yeah.
It's always on me.
I totally agree. And yet
So come over, Zen. I got dishes. I totally need that help. Come over.
I'm the chief cook and bottle washer in our family, and we've got my wife and her 90-year-old mother and her soon to be 18-year-old son. I love cooking, and my wife's a professional piano teacher. She's from St. Petersburg, Russia.
That's amazing.
And she's one of the most amazing pianists and teachers in the valley here. We're in the Phoenix area. And so she's got 30 some odd students that she spends time with. So she's, and the kind of effort that she gives to them, it just, wears her out at the end of the day. So this is how I participate. And it does, the dishes I don't necessarily care for, the cleaning I don't necessarily care for, the cooking I love to do.
Right. So, well, I want to tell you how aligned we are, and then I got to sign off. But so my wife is an actress, and she's been on Broadway, and she's got friends that are. What they do today as a team is they help high school students that want to get into the very best musical theater programs do that.
Oh, what a rewarding.
You have one of the top 10 schools in your neighborhood. So they do it for a very limited number of students, and she's the same because they're students. She's working typically till 8 or 9 o'clock at night, right? So I get to do all of that. And I will tell you, like, I see and feel the rewards of what they do. Their kids, like, they're on Broadway. My wife always has kids on the top TV shows. Like, it's miraculous, the stuff that gets accomplished. But it gets accomplished in the environment where I know I can say to my wife, hey, honey, you have just triggered the heck out of me. And now there's a choice. do you want to have a conversation before I clear my head, or now, or later after I've cleared my head? Like, do you want to, can you give me a little bit to sort myself out? So, and the number of fights I have eliminated, it's 90%.
Oh, you've learned how to hit the pause button. You hit the pause button and it alleviates 95 or maybe even 99% of the problems because they resolve themselves in your own head.
Absolutely. So this is where you actually get to implement the things that are in my book, Countable, because they impact your life as well as your business. Like
Absolutely.
you said, it's interpersonal communication.
Well, and you have a whole life. It's not compartmentalized or segmented. It's you're you. There's one you, and you're you. Like T. Harv Eker says, what you do anywhere, you do everywhere.
Absolutely. 100%.
So do you well.
Dan, I just want to really tell you how grateful I am for this conversation today, and I'm going to look forward to listening to it again myself.
Oh, me too. It was great. And thank you very much, Jeff. It was a true pleasure to speak at this level because I don't often get to. And thank you.
Well, it's great.
All right.
Thank you. And to all your listeners, again, it's countonable.com, and it's spelled COUNTONABLE.com.
And I'll have those links below the description.
Perfect.
All right. And namaste and in la catch. Thanks for sticking with us for this episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and I will see you next time.